Hello, Watershed. My name is Scott Hofert. I'm one of your pastors here, and if I've not had a chance to meet you before, it is really good to see you. I am unfortunately not able to be with you today because I am sequestered in my upstairs of my house because I went away out of town for several days last week. Upon coming home, I felt a little bit off, took a test, and before I came into my house, realized I was positive for COVID and went right to the upstairs and have been locked down for all of this week. And I'm feeling fine. I've been vaccinated, and I'm just one of those, I guess, rare cases where the vaccination clearly helped in terms of it could have been probably a lot worse, but still I caught the COVID. And I'm doing fine, and I'm frankly not hating my family leaving nice warm hot meals on the stairs for me to go down and get a couple times a day. So, but I am missing being out and seeing everybody and be able to hug necks. But all's going well this week overall. I am especially into this series because for me it has this massive taste of nostalgia. The room I am in right now is my son's room. Now, he's gone all week, so this ended up being a perfect time for me to be able to escape to his room and my son Keen. And in this room is a bunk bed set that my grandfather and his brother used. And then it was passed down to my father and his brother, my uncle. And then my brother and we used this bunk bed set growing up. And today I have it in my son Keen's room, but both of them have used it over the years as we switched it on and off into different rooms. And in this bunk bed, Taryn and the boy's mother and I, have probably read to them. I don't think it would be dramatic to say thousands of hours of reading, especially when they were younger and they would allow us to lay next to them and read these stories. And this series where we're able to sort of reach back into our childhood and pull out a story that has consequence and meaning to us. I didn't have one that I was able to look back on in my childhood, but I was able to look at some of the stories that we have been able to read with our children over the years. And for sure, I was able to find something that I think is deeply moving and compelling. And when I look back on it, it was something that my son Colson deeply got lost into. And so this is what it would typically happen as our boys were growing up. I have two sons. They're currently 17 and 14. But if we go back a lot of years, we would have dinner, wrap up dinner, and start making our way towards bed and getting the showers and baths and those things. And then, of course, they would brush their teeth, and invariably their hair would be soaking wet because they really wouldn't dry it as well as they should have. They would don the footy pajamas. They would jump into bed. They would, of course, the whole time they're wanting not to have to go to bed. They want to know if they could stay up, and they continue to ask and try to vie for more time. And we were, of course, getting them to bed. And there was a little bit of a battle until finally they would get laying down in the blankets over them, and maybe Elmo come a little bit closer. And then we would nestle in with each other, turn the bright light off, and just turn the dim light next to the bed. And so the chaos of the day somehow was seemingly come to an order. And we would enter into a completely different and unique world. And this happened for years and years and years. And sometimes we would read these similar books dozens and dozens of times to the point that they were almost memorized. And so what I'm going to do this time, instead of doing what I typically would have done, where I would jump into the bed, or the parent mom would jump into bed, and we would sort of cuddle these kids and our sons and then read to them, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to ask Colson if he would actually read to us. And one of the books that was quite meaningful to Colson in his own reality, his own story, and to myself as a parent who had the chance to read this book to him. It was called Weslandia, written by Paul Fleischman. And so I'm asking Colson, in kind of a reversal of roles, to read to us this morning.
Leave it. Okay. Of course he's miserable, moaned Wesley's mother. He sticks out. Like a nose, snapped his father. Listening through the heating vent, Wesley knew they were right. He was an outcast from the civilization around him. He alone in his town disliked pizza and soda, alarming his mother and the school nurse. He found professional football stupid. He had refused to shave half his head, the hairstyle worn by all the other boys despite his father's bribe of $5. Passing his neighborhood's two styles of housing, garage on the left and garage on the right, Wesley alone dreamed of more exciting forms of shelter. He had no friends, but plenty of tormentors. Fleeing them was the only sport he was good at. Each afternoon, his mother asked him what he'd learned in school that day. That seeds are carried great distances by the wind, he answered on Wednesday. That each civilization has its staple food crop, he answered on Thursday. That school's over and I should find a good summer project, he answered on Friday. As always, his father mumbled, "I'm sure you'll use that knowledge often."
So part of this story for me, especially at the beginning of this book, it pings me in this sort of awkward way from this standpoint. Wesley knows that he's different. He's bullied. The kids at school make fun of him. He knows that he's maybe kind of techie, maybe we'd be geeky on our modern way of defining who he is. He's an outcast. He doesn't fit in to the friend groups within his social structures. And so you would think when he comes home, it would be the place that would be safe for him to be himself, to be a little bit nerdy and to geek out over whatever it is he might be into. But invariably, there's this line that the author writes, and it says, listening through the heating vent, Wesley knew they were right, talking about his parents, that he was an outcast from the civilization around him. It's one thing to know that you're a little nerdy, a little geeky, an outsider, an outcast, whatever it might be. And for the record, the nerds rule the world, right? Not the athletes, not the jocks, not the preps or whoever the groups would be. And I don't think that even matters as much anymore from what I understand. But it's one thing to know that your social system thinks you're different and doesn't support you and might even bully you. It's one thing to go home and to have your caregiver, your parent, your guardian be the ones that also think that you're a little bit off. And in a very real sense here, this had to be incredibly painful for Wesley to hear. And probably it's something that at some level we've all had to navigate. Right? You grow up in a home, and of course we have parents that are less than perfect, and none of us have it all figured out. And we say things, hopefully unintentionally, that often can bring pain to our kids. But you would like to think that a parent, if anybody sees hope in their child, it is a mom or a father or the caregiver. It is the parent that says, we believe that there is the potential for something really meaningful to happen in his life. You know what? If they really want to be the president or an NFL star or a baseball player or a dancer, then if there's anybody to believe in them, that's what we get to do in the parenting space. And maybe for you as a child, you had all these exterior forces that were telling you that you were something that was not good, that you didn't fit in. And then when you went home, instead of it being another space that was going to support you, it was the place that actually hurt you. It was a place that, in a very real way, in that kind of rejection by saying that you might be an outcast, that you might be somebody who really doesn't have their stuff together and is coming from your parent or your parents, that is incredibly painful. Dare I even say a form of abandonment. And if nothing else, it is at least trauma at some level that you would have to navigate, to feel so alone that the only way you get to escape is in your own mind, that you can't even begin to fantasize about a different reality in front of your parents and them support that dream or that ideal. Dr. Bruce Perry wrote in his book, What Happened to You? He gave some powerful metaphors and powerful illustrations. And I think this is something that most of us, especially if we grew up in like the 70s and the 80s, 90s, and maybe even a little bit in the early 2000s, there was this story, there is this parental narrative, and we have as adults, that was maybe subtly or very intentionally imposed upon us as kids, that says, you're resilient. That whatever trauma happens to you, it ultimately won't have its way with you. It ultimately, somehow, you experience healing and it goes away. And the metaphor that is often used is, you and I are like a Nerf ball. This is an old, dried out Nerf ball that we have on a trampoline that we use when we play out there. And if I take this Nerf ball and I squish it and I bend it or I stand on it, it's going to always come back to its original. It's going to always come back to the round circular variable that it is. No matter what I do, no matter how hard I press on it. And most of us, we have been taught that our childhood is like this, that we're resilient, that no matter what happens, we do bounce back. The research is in now that actually is not what happens. That actually our brains are marked by every experience we have. Good experiences or negative experiences. Beautiful transformative realities or traumatic realities. And we don't have the luxury of having the kind of resilience that we have been taught that we think we should have. And for some of us, we live with that sort of grid that says, well, yes, childhood was difficult, and yes, you experienced real trauma, but you know what? Maybe you just need to grow up a little bit. Maybe you just need to toughen up a little bit. Maybe you just kind of pull up by your bootstraps and everything will be fine. But in reality, you've been deeply marked by our childhood. And it's important to understand that actually is something that you need to understand and need to acknowledge, and that trauma comes in complete different forms and levels, and it's on a spectrum. Some trauma is incredibly intense, some is not as intense, but nonetheless, it marks you, it changes you, it impacts you. But then there's this other metaphor that I really like. It's this metaphor of a hanger. So the beauty of these hangers are they can be used in so many different ways, right? We use hangers for, if you got an old school car, you need to unlock your door. I'm trying to turn this thing. Maybe you lost an earring down the drain, and so you stick the hook down the drain and pull out the earring. These hangers are incredibly pliable. They're valuable to more than just being able to hang up clothes. We use them in all these different ways, and invariably we got hundreds of them sitting in our home. The thing that's interesting about a hanger is every time I bend it, I have the ability to take it back to the way it was, or at least close to the way it was, right? Because if I bend a part in this hanger, invariably, it will never go back perfectly. There will always be some kind of subtle mark, some kind of subtle reflection, some type of scarring. And what also happens, if I bend at this point too many times, it softens and it ultimately breaks. What if this is more of a metaphor of how we evolve and how we grow and how we morph as children? And as adults, when we look back on our lives, it's this hanger with a bunch of little scars and a bunch of little marks that are really the compilation of our life that make us, that impact us, that influence us. So no, we're not resilient. No, the trauma that you experienced as a child was very real. That being unloved or unaccepted by your parent is huge trauma. The death of a family member, the divorce of a family member, those things wreak huge havoc on us, and it's okay to be able to speak into those and to address those.
Suddenly, Wesley's thoughts shot sparks. His eyes blazed. His father was right. He could actually use what he learned that week for a summer project that would top all others. He would grow his own staple food crop and found his own civilization. The next morning, he turned over a plot of ground in his yard. That night, a wind blew in from the west. It raced through the trees and set his curtains snapping. Wesley lay awake, listening. His land was being planted. 5 days later, the first seedlings appeared. "You'll have almighty bedlam on your hands if you don't get those weeds out," warned his neighbor. "Actually, that's my crop," replied Wesley. "In this type of garden, there are no weeds." Following ancient tradition, Wesley's fellow gardeners grew tomatoes, beans, Brussels sprouts, and nothing else. Wesley found it thrilling to open his land to chance, to invite new and unknown. The plants shot up past his knees, then his waist. They seemed to be all of the same sort. Wesley couldn't find them in any plant book. "Are those tomatoes, beans, or Brussels sprouts?" asked Wesley's neighbor. "None of the above," replied Wesley. Fruit appeared, yellow at first and blushing to magenta. Wesley picked one and sliced through the rind to the juicy purple center. He took a bite and found the taste an entrancing blend of peach, strawberry, pumpkin pie, and flavors he had no name for. Ignoring the shelf of cereals in the kitchen, Wesley took to breakfasting on the fruit. He dried half a rind to serve as a cup, built his own squeezing device, and drank the fruit's juice throughout the day. Pulling up a plant, he found large tubers on the roots. These he boiled, fried, or roasted on the family barbecue, seasoning them with a pinch of the plant's highly aromatic leaves. It was hot work tending to his crop. To keep off the sun, Wesley wove himself a hat from strips of the plant's woody bark. His success with the hat inspired him to devise a spinning wheel and loom on which he wove a loose-fitting robe from the stalk's soft inner fibers. Unlike jeans, which he found scratchy and heavy, the robe was comfortable, reflected the sun, and offered myriad opportunities for pockets.
Coping, it's something that we all have to do in order to survive sometimes. The question is, what do you do when in terms of what coping looks like for you? So Wesley, here he's experiencing this abandonment. He's been ostracized from his friends because of not fitting in for all the social issues that he was navigating, being a little too geeky, a little too nerdy, whatever it might be. He shows up at home, the same kind of abandonment, maybe actually much worse, because if there's supposed to be a safe place, it's supposed to be parents, and his parents were acknowledging everything he was afraid that everybody else was telling him. And they didn't get to dream about something else that could be. And so for Wesley, his ability to cope, what's he do? He built a new world, right? That's how he coped. I think this is pretty true and illustrative for most of us. I look back at my childhood, and for me, I had a pretty good upbringing. It was a very privileged upbringing. I had opportunity and exposure that allowed me to go to the privilege of going to college and all these different things. My family was not wealthy, but we weren't poor either, and so we always had all our needs met. And my family was together. And when my parents started unraveling, it freaked everything out for me. They separated when I was in high school, and it was absolutely the single most traumatic event in my childhood, because all that I had known and all that I was anticipating to be in terms of some sense of normalcy and reliability and predictability had the potential of being able to completely going away. How was school going to be paid for? Was that an option? What's it mean to be together? What's it mean to be together for Christmas and holidays? And how do we dance that? And all the things that many of you have had to navigate yourself as well. And I would cope by predominantly escaping. It was kind of my MO. And so I remember being a junior in high school, I played on the soccer team there, and I can remember it's happened often, especially on a Sunday afternoon. For whatever reason, Sundays are vivid in my mind. And I don't know if my parents would come home from church, whatever the tension was in that space, it somehow intensified on a Sunday afternoon. And I can remember just taking off sometimes. Like, I could get out of here and go to the soccer field and just take shots on goal. And it was a way of coping. It was a way of just venting a little bit, and arguably it was an okay, healthy way to do. A couple years later, I graduated high school, and I went off to college with no sense of really ever coming back to Buffalo. Like, I wanted out. I wanted to escape this whole thing. And again, grateful for my childhood, wonderful friendships, enjoyed school, and a good church experience overall. But the pain of what I'd experienced that year or so before, I needed something completely new, and I had to get out of Dodge and ended up going to school in Virginia and never went back. And haven't really been back only a handful of times over the years, and realize now much, and I think I was more unconsciously doing this, but looking back, I was escaping Buffalo. I was not looking forward to wanting to live there and stay and all that. I needed to get out of Dodge, and that's exactly what I did. As an adult, I can look back now with a sense of awareness that I did not have for most of my life. And really in my late 40s, I began to realize the impact that my childhood or my parents not being together has played on me. And just for the record, I've got a great relationship with my folks. I love them. We're really close. Any given time, I will talk or see my parents, and almost at a weekly level. So I am in a wonderful place with my parents and grateful for them, and have never not been loved through this process. But nonetheless, it has marked me, and here's how it's marked me. When I engage a relationship, I have this innate assumption, and it's a wrong assumption, that you're going to ultimately walk away from this relationship. So what I find myself doing, that's when I'm unhealthy, that's the way I see it. When I'm healthy, I realize that's not necessarily true, and that's self-sabotaging what could be something of deep consequence and meaning, right? The relationship that I could have with you. But invariably, I'm going to be resistant to go too deep, because if I go too deep, I'm going to get hurt too badly down the road, possibly. And the thing is, that's life, right? I can't live in that kind of fear, but that's often the wiring with which I come to coping in these places when I'm not healthy. And when I'm healthy, I'm aware of that I can understand that you might not want to spend the rest of your life being my best friend, and that's okay, and I can release you of that, but it's really hard in the kind of work that we get to do. So being here at Watershed, we work really hard. We bleed for this thing. And when you tell us you love it and you're excited about it and you're here, in a weird way that fuels my ego and my awareness of maybe somehow things are really good. And then if you leave, job shift, you don't agree with something we're saying, something happened here and you don't like what's going on, and you leave, it's really hard not to internalize that. It's incredibly difficult not to say, well, is it me? Which is an incredibly selfish way of looking at things. But it's how, when I'm not healthy, having experienced abandonment, I cope. I mean, I even look at the disciples, right? They had experienced abandonment with Jesus in this sort of weird turn of events. So you're familiar with this last meal that Jesus is having with his disciples. And it's this meal that is an annual event within Judaism. So it's a celebratory Passover experience, they call it. It happens every year, and it's a time when family and friends get together, and it's to be celebratory. So everybody sits down, the disciples and Jesus sit down, and Jesus flatlines the entire thing, takes all the energy out of the room when he says, here's the deal, guys, this evening, one of you are going to turn me over to Rome. Another one of you are going to deny me a handful of different times. And by the way, I'm going somewhere where you can't go, he says. To the disciples, they thought he meant he was leaving them to go somewhere else without them, to go to some other part of the world or the country or whatever it was. And what Jesus was saying is, I'm going somewhere else. This is in John. I'm going somewhere else, which is to die. I'm going to die. And you are not ready, nor can you join me in that place yet. We often think he meant heaven, but that's not what he was saying at all. He was talking about he's going to a place and he's going to die, of which the disciples ultimately would also be ready to do, but not in that moment. But all they could hear is that he was leaving them. They couldn't take in what he meant by that. And again, you got to imagine, here are these disciples. They are not the most loved in the culture of the first century. Rome sees them as outcasts. Judaism sees them as the progressive end of the spectrum and does not like what they're doing or who they are, because after all, they're followers in particular of Jesus, and Rome and the Jewish system was definitely not liking Jesus. They came from relatively poor families. They were fishermen. They had a trade. They didn't have any real resources. And for the first time, they felt like they were a part of something of consequence. And Jesus invites them into this 2 and 3 year journey of which they are together. And they are feeling the most alive and the most confident and the most loved and the most cared for that they ever have. And then out of the blue, one night, Jesus says, it's all over. And he says that and he goes on to say some really cool things that are really meaningful. Like, you're going to actually do better work without me. That what he's in essence saying is, my spirit is going to be here, that the presence of who I am, the Christ, who I am, is going to be left behind. And in that space, you're going to do better work than you've ever done before. What he's saying is, you're going to learn to cope. You feel abandoned right now, but you're going to learn to cope. And here's what's interesting. The narrative of the New Testament is somewhat, at least in part, in abandoning Jesus. Where he's abandoning his people. Even Paul was assuming that Jesus was going to come back. This is much of the Pauline writing and the Pauline assumption, that Jesus is going to come back and he is going to restore this global kingdom, this world kingdom. And invariably, over Paul's lifetime, Jesus does not return. At some level, had to feel some type of abandonment. What's going on here? And the question is, even in the scriptures, even in the stories of Jesus, this is a very real reality. So how do we cope? How do we navigate? What do we do with these kinds of realities when we deal with deep pain? And so maybe what we end up doing is we find a world that is a different place to reside.
His schoolmates were scornful, then curious. Grudgingly, Wesley allowed them 10 minutes apiece at his mortar, crushing the plant seeds to collect the oil. This oil had a tangy scent and served him both as a suntan lotion and mosquito repellent. He rubbed it on his face each morning and sold small amounts to his former tormentors at the price of $10 per bottle. "What's happened to your wash?" asked his mother one day. Wesley admitted that he no longer wore it. He told time by the stock that he used as a sundial and had divided the day into 8 segments, the number of petals on the plant's flower. He'd adopted a new counting system as well, based likewise upon the number 8. His domain, home to such many innovations, he named Weslandia. Uninterested in traditional sports, Wesley made up his own. These were designed for a single player and used many different parts of the plant. His spectators looked on with envy. Realizing that more players would offer him more scope, Wesley invented other games that would include his schoolmates, games rich with strategy and complex scoring systems. He tried to be patient with the other players' blunders. August was unusually hot. Wesley built himself a platform and took to sleeping in the middle of Westlandia. He passed the evenings playing a flute he'd fashioned from a stock or gazing at the sky, renaming the constellations. His parents noted Wesley's improved morale. "It's the first time in years he's looked happy," said his mother. Wesley gave him a tour of Westlandia. "What do you call this plant?" asked his father. Not knowing its name, Wesley had become calling it Swist, from the sound of its leaves rustling in the breeze. In like manner, he named his new fabrics, games, and foods until he created an entire language. Mixing the plant's oil with soot, Wesley made a passable ink. As a finale to his summer project, he used the ink in his own 80-letter alphabet to record the history of his civilization's founding. In September, Wesley returned to school. He had no shortage of friends.
Try the last page, and when you look up, look like you're not mad.
What do you mean? I'm not mad. I didn't look mad. He had no shortage of friends.
As I read this book again and again, especially the last several weeks, I'm reminded as to why Colson loved this book. It was a step into a place that was unrealistic, a fantasy, something that was never going to happen, but illustrative of children, it's where they often find themselves. And actually, it's a developmental space. It's really healthy for them, right? So for many of us as children, we are afraid that there are monsters in the closet or under the bed. As we age, we come to a realization that says, no, that's not true, and we begin to understand that cognitively. But part of the developmental process is going from this place of fantasy to truth, to reality. I remember my boys. Colson, in particular, would be outside with his lightsaber, and he would be rescuing somebody that you couldn't see and talking with that person and running around the backyard, going after the antagonist, as he was, of course, the protagonist. He was the good guy. I do remember times we'd have sword fights, and he always made me to be the bad guy, and he liked being the good guy. My youngest, Keen, he would do the same thing. He'd be in the backyard with the plastic swords and run around, or he'd play with his little Lego men, and they would have all these things going on. So it was very commonplace for our kids, especially at a younger age, to live in this place of fantasy. And maybe one of the most, like saddening, painful times as a parent is watching your kids move into this place that says, wait a minute, I think I realized that it's not a lightsaber. All it is a plastic tube with a flashlight. You're like, no, don't lose that. Don't lose that, child. No, it's okay. You want to go in the backyard and pretend to go after the bad guy? Go ahead. I know you're 18, but it's really, developmentally, that wouldn't be good if they're doing it at 18. But you mourn the loss of their innocence when they begin to realize that life is painful, it's difficult, it's hard, and so they don't know what to do with that fantasy space. Maybe for most of us, because our childhood was so painful, there was real trauma there, that once you moved out of that place of fantasy, once you realized that your lightsaber was not real, you lived with such intense reality that you never allowed yourself to dream again. You know what I mean by that? Maybe a better way of saying it would be this. You wanted to be an astronaut. So instead of at least going into a field that is in that space, maybe of the sciences or whatever it might be, you took the job working for your dad's firm. You're making more money you never know what to do with, but you're miserable. Maybe you thought you never would be good enough for anybody, so you never really dated a lot, and you're getting a little bit older and you're alone, and you wish more than anything you could be with somebody, but in your mind, you don't think you deserve it. And you gave up on the possibility of being with somebody, and so you just sort of sequestered yourself to being alone. Maybe you wanted to go off to school so badly. I know this is true for some of my friends. Right now, here they are like in their 30s, and they're going after the school dream that they never did early on in life because the resources weren't there and the opportunities weren't there. But what if part of living the adult age-like time well is actually learning how to live a little bit back in the dream world? And I don't mean lightsabers and plastic swords. I mean, what if you began to reimagine what your reality could be like? Because for Wesley and in Weslandia, his world was still nestled very much in reality, right? The same people were still around him. They didn't go away. How they engaged him was differently. There were friendships that were different. But nothing was going to change until Wesley introduced a new world into the current context. What's that look like for you? Maybe your dream of being an artist is only going to be realized if you actually put the time into it. And it's okay if you're rejected. It's okay if somebody doesn't like your artwork. It's okay if somebody doesn't like the thing that you've created with your hands. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to build something and some people to appreciate it and then many to desperately not appreciate it. As a matter of fact, to put it down. So I understand that and I get that. But instead of allowing our childhood to rob us of dreams, to rob us of the unpractical, maybe what we need to do is to try to figure out, what does it mean to allow a new system into an old system? And that was Weslandia, right? What is the thing that you're dreaming of? What is the thing you're hoping for? What is the thing that you're longing for? And are you going to allow your childhood, with all the different bends that the hanger has created, right? You've got all these different bends. Are you going to allow it to not be effective, your life as an adult? Are you going to blame all these different bends on and create excuses as to why you can't work through that trauma? Or are you going to say, you know what, I'm going to do something. I'm going to work on these corners and on these scars and these marks that maybe my childhood and my life have brought my way. I'm going to get the pliers and I'm going to do my best to, I won't be perfect, but I'll maybe straighten out a little bit more. Or maybe you go to therapy and you really do the interior work. Or maybe you go back to your kids and you offer the apology. Or maybe you go back to your spouse or your partner and say, what's it mean for us to reimagine our lives together, right? Or maybe you go and you start that small business dream that you've always wanted, and yes, it might cost you everything, and yes, you might lose everything, but you might find yourself the happiest you've ever been. That you allow the old world system no longer to control you because you enter in a new reality. Doesn't mean that the old world's not there. Doesn't mean it's not influencing it. But the old world will not change until you bring something new into it. Does that make sense? So what I'd like to do, if I could, is do something a little bit old school. And I have found, for the last several years, I have to admit that the passages of the scriptures have not fallen as meaningful on my heart and soul as they have maybe years ago. But recently, I have found a new imagination when it comes to the Bible. I have found a new awakening to it, a new joy in it. And so I'd like to read to you the 23rd Psalm if I could. I'd like to kind of end it with that because I think it's important to understand that within our tradition, it is very significant to have a sense that we connect with God. That not only we connect with this essence, but that in some way they are connecting with us. That they are even maybe there for us. And so some rest often falls into that place. That it's not just me trying to pull up sort of my bootstraps and do it all by myself, that there's this energy and there's this life force that is also behind us. And so when I read these passages, that's often how I see it. So Psalm 23, God my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. Thank you, Watershed, for our time together this morning. I love you guys.